began with weather that lied. The forecast promised dry coastal air, but by evening Los Angeles pulled a thin veil of rain over its shoulders, fine needles stitching light to pavement. The hour was 10:43 p.m., late enough to narrow a street's courage, early enough that windows still glowed with normal life. The corridor smelled of wet dust and old paint. Fluorescent bulbs hummed the same note as her nerves. She should have kept walking. Instead, she counted apartment numbers along a long hallway off a court in Koreatown, searching for number 316, the photographer's sublet she'd found online. She was new to the city and new to the art job that had promised too much freedom and delivered too much silence. Her suitcase wheels squeaked over cracked linoleum. The rain tapped the fire escape like impatient fingers. She misread the scuffed brass 319 for 316 and knocked, knuckles stinging in the cold. The lock turned with the soft confidence of someone who rarely feared visitors. He stood there in a doorway made of shadow and kitchen light. A white dress shirt was open at the throat in a way that made it look formal and intimate at once. His hair was rain-damp, though he'd been inside. His presence had the gravity of a storm that chooses its field. Behind him, a single pendant lamp burned over a table where a bottle of mezcal sweated and 2 crystal glasses waited like decisions. "Oh," she said, breath fogging, suitcase handle biting her palm. Sorry, wrong number." His gaze assessed the hallway, then settled on her jaw, where the damp had collected like small tears that weren't. He had eyes that could soften a room or narrow it to a blade. He didn't move to close the door. "Which number are you seeking?" 316. "Then you are 2 doors to the left of safe," he said, tone warm and unalarmed, the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. Border-worn, desert-sanded. She should have moved. Instead, lightning flickered inside her, recognition with no logic. Something about him. The way he left the door open as weather passed through. The way he held his stillness. Felt like a note struck on a piano she had always owned and never touched. "Thank you," she managed. I'm Lena." That was not the kind of introduction you offer a stranger at 10:43 p.m. under stained ceiling tiles. He received it anyway. Raphael, the name tilted the hallway. It made the fluorescence buzz a semitone lower. Somewhere down the corridor, a television laughed at the wrong time. A burst of wind slid rain under the back stairwell door. He looked at her suitcase wheels, shining like small moons. "First night?" "First and already mistaken," she said, the smile that rose uncoiling something behind her ribs. He stepped back, a quiet invitation for the rain to stop trying to own her. "Come in a second. It's not a night to stand in a hallway pretending it's not cold." She moved before her good sense caught up. Inside was warm light, eucalyptus in a vase, a turntable whispering a soul record so soft it felt like a secret told to the room. The kitchen counter had a bowl of limes, bright as punctuation. She noticed he wore no watch. She noticed he set a second glass on the table, then reconsidered and poured water into it instead. His presence didn't dominate the space. It tuned it. The walls carried city noise like a low tide. She set her suitcase beside the table and wrapped both hands around the water glass, grateful for a prop. "Wrong door," he said, humor sidelong. "Can be a genre of fate in this town." "I'd prefer a boring genre," she said. "Quiet, easy shelves." "You chose the wrong city," he replied gently. "It should have been nothing. A misread number, a glass of water, a nod, a good night. But closeness rewrites proportion. Rain made the window a fogged mirror. Their silhouettes blurred into the same shape. They studied one another with the careful curiosity of people who know their loneliness has good camouflage. "What do you owe tonight, Lena?" he asked. "The courage to keep standing up," she said, surprising herself with the speed of her truth. "New job, small pay, big hope?" He tilted his head, and in that angle she saw fatigue arranged like art. "I remember that currency." A door down the hall thumped. Footsteps negotiated the dark. His eyes flicked toward the sound, not fearful, simply precise. The kind of attention that counts exits. She recognized it not from experience, but from instinct. She thought, ask his last name. Ask what he does. Ask why his apartment smells faintly of new leather and gun oil under the lime. Ask why the mezcal bottle waits like a question he has answered too many times alone. Instead, she said softly, "Thank you for the water." His mouth moved, a line loosening. "Thank you for knocking." There were 2 more seconds where the world might have decided differently. Instead, the weather shifted. The rain thickened. The hallway's television cut to static. She couldn't name why, but the moment asked for witness. He didn't touch her. She didn't touch him. The intimacy was in not pretending they were strangers entirely. She left with the glass of water's taste stored along her tongue, found 316, collected a key from a rusted lockbox that pretended to be discreet, and fell asleep on a futon that crackled like cellophane. She dreamt of a door opening into warm light, and the sound of someone listening as if it were a profession. Outside, the rain kept the secrets it always keeps when it agrees to put out the street's lights one shine at a time. Morning came as reluctant gold. The rain had rinsed the air. Palm fronds wore dull coins of water. In the kitchen of the sublet, the coffee maker tried to be helpful and failed with heart. Lena burned toast and laughed at herself. The sound felt like a novice bird practicing flight. The window framed Koreatown waking, steam rising from the dumpling place on the corner, a woman in a red hoodie walking a pit bull who wore embarrassment with dignity, the distant saw teeth of the Hollywood Hills. She stepped into the street and let the city teach her its morning grammar. A bus exhaled beautifully and left. A vendor arranged flowers in colors that corrected the gray memories inside her. She carried her camera because memory plus light is what had always saved her. At the crosswalk, a beat-up Civic braked too late. She hopped back and felt adrenaline announce itself like an old roommate coming to collect mail. At the art house in Echo Park, the director showed her around a warren of rooms where instruments waited, half asleep. The building held the fever of 100 rehearsals. "We'll keep you drowned in work," he said, smiling the smile of a man who pays with conviction. Portraits, behind the scenes, stills. People will forget their masks around you, I can tell. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to be the kind of person who made people feel seen without cost. She dove in, learning the light in each room the way a pianist learns a new key, hesitant, then smoother, then all at once muscle memory. By dusk she was wrung out and buzzing. She stopped at a bodega where the clerk knew to ask where she was from before asking for ID. As she stepped back onto the sidewalk, a black SUV idled across the lane. The paint didn't shine. It absorbed light. A man stood beside it, hands in jacket pockets trying to look like background. He failed. She recognized the silhouette before her logic permitted it. The knowledge moved through her body faster than a name. Raphael leaned against the SUV like it owed him affection. He didn't smile exactly. He softened. "Wrong door again," he said. "Right street," she replied. "You always stand like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're anchoring a small country that keeps remembering it's an island." That wrung a low chuckle out of him, surprised and honest. "Get in," he said. "Just a ride." The night pretends to be safe when it's damp. It lies. She never got into cars with men she barely knew, but her body read him like weather. Danger, yes, but directional, not chaotic. She climbed into leather that had learned the shape of power. The driver didn't look at her. He didn't look at anything extraneous. "Busy day?" Raphael asked. "I made portraits of a drummer who thinks silence is an insult," she said. Handing him a print she'd slipped into her pocket. A woman mid-laugh, head thrown back. A symbol catching gold like a caught coin. He studied it longer than a man like him would be assumed to study anything unrelated to strategy. "You see what people believe about themselves," he said. "Not just their face." "Sometimes belief is the only light they bring," she said. They didn't talk like strangers. They talked like 2 languages always meant to share a border. The SUV moved through the city with practiced sinlessness. Traffic parted and reformed. When they reached her building, rain began again. Not enough to wet the street, just enough to draw a shiver line along the spine. "Do you always say yes to rides with men whose last names you don't know?" he asked. "Only when the alternative is walking under streetlights that remember too much," she said. He watched the light move across her eyes. "Lena," he said carefully, "I am not safe." "No one is," she replied, more gently than she meant to. But you feel deliberate. He nodded, absorbing the word like a sentence passed. Good night. Good night, Raphael. Inside her apartment, she peeled off damp denim, stood barefoot on cold tile, and listened to the city settle into its nocturnal heart. Sirens slid like quick knives. Somewhere, neighbors argued softly in a language she didn't yet know. Tenderness threaded through the irritation like a secret ribbon. She lay down and stared at the ceiling stain that looked like a map of a country she might never visit. She did not tell herself stories about him because she wanted to avoid lies. She also did not forbid them because she wanted to practice the muscle of hope. She slept like someone who had found her name spoken correctly for the first time in months. Fog hung low on the fourth morning, a marine layer that turned the city into something half-dreamed. The office called, a last-minute shoot at a restored theater downtown. She said yes too quickly, yes like oxygen. The theater smelled of velvet and old applause. She knelt in aisle 14 to capture a dancer mid-arc, the insolent kindness of her body making math obsolete. When she emerged onto the sidewalk with a memory card full of small miracles, 2 men waited, beige windbreakers, knock-off smiles. They flanked the doorway like punctuation marks that didn't belong in the sentence. You, Lena? One of them asked. Southern California flat in his voice, a geography that had never left its freeway. Sometimes, she said. Cute, the other said. You got a package at your place. We can deliver faster. Her hands went cold in the reliable way fear is always honest. I'm not expecting anything. Everyone's expecting something, the first one said. They offered a manila envelope like it weighed nothing. She didn't touch it. A single raindrop found her collarbone and slid down like a forewarning. How do you know my address? She asked. We know doors, he said, smiling with teeth he'd earned in cheap fights. Who you call if you open the wrong one? She thought of a white shirt open at the throat, a bottle of mezcal waiting like company, a voice that measured rooms and made them gentle. She didn't call. She stared at the envelope until their impatience began to show at the edges like fray. I'm late for work, she said, and stepped sideways, bailing out of the moment like a kayaker who knows when a current wants marriage. They didn't follow. The envelope remained in the other man's hand, corner bent like a half-formed threat. She recorded their faces with her lens without lifting the camera, irises memorizing. Breath controlled, fear filed into a drawer labeled later. On the bus home, she stood swaying as Los Angeles listed through its discomforts, eyes on the smear of city through the fogged window. A girl in a Dodgers cap played a rhythm on the seat back with chewed nails. An old man slept with the faith of someone who has learned to do it anywhere. Her block smelled of wet concrete and curry. The envelope was taped to her door, cross-hatched with clear tape, the shape of a bandage. She peeled it off with deliberate fingers. Inside, a single photograph of her standing in Raphael's doorway. Wet hair, his hand holding the edge of the door as if refusing to let the night come in. Someone had circled his face in red marker and drawn a question mark in the space beside it. She carried the photo inside and sat on the floor. Her knees obeyed gravity like a practiced prayer. Anger came first, clean, clarifying. Shame was late, contrived. Fear arrived as a physical phenomenon, a tremor behind the ribs. She thought about how swiftly joy invents something to lose. She thought about men in windbreakers who sell dread as if it's service. She didn't dial. She typed instead, "Wrong door keeps knocking back." Then she erased it and wrote, "Are you in danger because of me?" Raphael's reply arrived instantly enough to teach her something about his attention. Come downstairs. The silver sedan idled by the hydrant. The driver, a woman this time, studied the rear view with a gaze that had survived mayhem with composure. Lena slid into leather that remembered her. Raphael sat with his body like a secret he was ready to tell if she asked the right way. He didn't ask to see the photo. She handed it to him. He regarded the red circle like a child's attempt at curse. They miscalculated, he said. They think I am easiest to move by threatening me. They don't know I'm made of stubborn and a long history of guilt. Threatening does not move guilt. It sharpens it. Who are they? Men who confuse ownership with love. And you? She asked, softly stubborn. Who are you? He didn't flinch. The man who would like to be someone else. Failing that, the man who can end this before it tries to become art. She let the car hush them for a block. Rain slicked the streets to onyx. Taillights drew red vowels on the asphalt. "If I walk away," she said, "does it ease anything?" "No," he said too quickly. Then, gentler, "You walking away would feed someone's belief that fear is nutrition. I prefer them hungry." He directed the driver to mid-city, to a diner that had been serving coffee to impossible hours since the 60s. Inside, the waitress called him Sir, in a way that made respect sound like history. They took a booth where shadows were kind. He placed the photo face down on the table as if denying it oxygen. "Listen to me," he said, voice low enough to be mineable. A glance, a tap of the finger on the photo, does not happen to you because you knocked on the wrong door. It happens because I have made choices that collect noise. I can quiet it. How? By telling the noise it has mistaken itself for music, he said. By making sure the men under the windbreakers discover their bosses love them nothing at all. It occurred to her then, what the city had hinted without naming. Raphael wasn't a man the quiet feared. He was a man the quiet obeyed. And still, he looked at her like a confession he wanted to earn, not like a possession he intended to keep. "Lena," he said, "you are permitted to run." "I won't," she replied, surprising herself with how little courage it required. "Not from a photograph that thinks it's prophecy." He closed his eyes briefly. Gratitude arranged his mouth. "Then let me try a tenderness I'm bad at." "What tenderness?" "Care without control," he said, and the words embarrassed him in the sweet way bravery embarrasses. He moved the photo aside and wrapped both his hands around her. Glass of water to warm it before he slid it back to her, the exact opposite of the first night, the same ritual turned inside out. She felt her ribs widen like a home with an extra room. Outside, the rain grew more articulate. Somewhere, a door closed with the finality of someone quitting a job that had worn their name down to nub. The night pressed its ear to the glass to hear what they would say next. Heat arrived abruptly, the way Santa Anas step down from the mountains and start rearranging moods. By afternoon, the streets shimmered. By evening, the city smelled faintly electrical. The palms rattled like 1,000 dry secrets. Lena worked in a studio with swamp coolers that rolled and hummed and failed gracefully. Sweat was a new alphabet along her spine. She kept moving, portraits, framing, small jokes to persuade strangers into ease. At dusk, her phone sang a single note. Raphael, rooftop, sunset, no speeches. She climbed 3 flights of stairs to the building's roof, shoulder-brushing walls that held decades of names etched by keys. The sky was all bruise and gold. He stood by the ledge where a low wall pretended to be enough. He held 2 paletas, melting watermelon staining his knuckles. The sight of him eating something juvenile and sweet rearranged a long hallway inside her. "Bribery," he said, offering one. "The noblest tool." Wind lifted the hairs at her nape. The city unfurled below. Taillights unfocused into ribbon, a helicopter stuttering over Pico like a stubborn moth. Windows opening to release heat. Street vendors lifting smoke into air like bold prayers. The warehouse district glowed like a low, waiting fire at the far edge. "They will escalate," he said, as if narrating weather. "Then I will end it. The middle part is the part I dislike." "I don't need details," she said. "I need you alive." His eyes shifted, dark to darker, a tide moving out. "That is not a currency I am used to being paid in." "Get used to it," she said, and placed her palm on the cool ledge, doing nothing heroic except staying. He told her small things he never told anyone. The way winter mornings smelled in the town where he learned to lie skillfully to protect people who deserved tender lives. The music his mother hummed while splitting limes. The scar on his shoulder that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with falling out of a tree, because he had wanted to touch the sky sooner than God allowed. She told him why she had left her own city, how love had made her smaller instead of bigger, how silence can be another name for leaving, how cameras had taught her to measure the distance between harm and home. They didn't kiss. That would have been too easy. They looked at each other long enough to make the space change shape. When night fell fully, heat still pressed its palm to stone. Down on the street, a car idled too long, then left without going anywhere. Raphael's phone lit up like a warning flare. He answered without hello. 2 phrases, both clean, both promises disguised as logistics. I'm coming. Don't move, he looked at her. The roof's small lights made his eyes hold stars. The very loud part, he said. I prefer you under a roof with a bolt and a chain. Come back after, she said, because naming the future is a spell. I intend to, he replied, because refusing to promise is also a spell, a humbler one. He left like he always did, without performance and with speed. She went downstairs and waited in the half-lit apartment, the fan clicking every third revolution, heat turning her thoughts into soft clay. It's a particular helplessness, loving someone who might be purpose-built for danger. The city seems to lean in to watch. Time became something viscous. She didn't pace. She made tea in a kitchen hot enough to turn water to steam with her intention alone. She stood at the window where the neighborhood kept offering the same scene. A woman carrying a sleeping child. A cyclist pedaling with music in earbuds. 2 teenagers holding hands like a protest against everything that wanted them angry. The explosion arrived as a fist of light on the eastern horizon, followed by a slap of air against glass. It wasn't close enough to break, but close enough to decide the next hour's mood. Sirens seized the distance. Dogs argued with fate. Her phone. I'm okay. She sat on the floor. She cried once. Cleanly, the way rain arrives after a season of heat. 5 minutes later, she wiped her face and laughed, because that's what the body does when tragedy sends a decoy. The key turned in her lock with quiet competence. He stepped inside, shirt burned at the cuff, ash in his hair like borrowed winter. The room recognized him and exhaled. What did you end? She asked. A warehouse that wanted to pretend it was a church, he said. A belief that fear pays better than mercy. Part of a life I had been pretending I could keep and still deserve rooms like this. She crossed to him and touched the ash threaded in his hair with the tenderness of people who know they might one day have to narrate what they lost. He didn't flinch. He bowed his head into her hand, because surrender sometimes saves people more efficiently than victory. The room held them like a cupped palm. They kissed in air still warm from the day. A slow, sober thing. Not a possession, an alignment. His breath tasted of smoke and watermelon. Her hands learned the map of his shoulders with a careful scholar's patience. Outside, sirens made their case for permanence. Inside, 2 people rehearsed a different thesis. They did not make promises. They made choices, which are harder. The city cooled the way a fever breaks, slowly first, then all at once. Clouds rolled in low, apologetic. Dawn was silver and undecided. Cars wore a thin film of ash. Sprinkler water drew it into small rivers that ran toward the gutter and took no one with them. Raphael stood at the window while coffee breathed on the counter. He looked smaller and more honest in mourning. He had ended something huge and not named. He had opened something small and blazing. He had cut ropes that had taught his hands their strength. It left him lighter, which is another kind of vertigo. Do you regret it? Lena asked, voice soft from sleep and truth. I regret not having learned sooner, he said. I do not regret what the learning cost. They took their coffee to MacArthur Park, where the sky leaned down and the water tried hard to be a lake. Vendors set up under quick tents, colors defiant against the gray. A boy kicked a deflated soccer ball with glee high enough to convert disappointment into comedy. The air smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet. You're not safe, Lena said, because belief needs reality to hold its hand. I'm not, he agreed, but I am less dangerous to myself. They sat on a green bench that had names carved into it like declarations no weather could erase. He told her the names of streets in his childhood town the way a man tells the names of first friends, each with an affection that refuted geography. She showed him photos on her camera of the drummer from the art house and a custodian with a smile like sunrise and a woman who had been waiting in a clinic for a long time, reading a romance novel and wearing hope-like perfume. People trust you, he said softly. I hope I always behave like someone worthy of sharing that space. You're trying, she said. Trying can be the most honest verb. They walked the lake as the first drops arrived, hesitant, then confident. People didn't run. They lifted faces to be corrected. The surface turned textured. Ducks took the weather personally. Across the park, a protest line gathered with handmade signs about rent and dignity. A tamales vendor waved them over, insisted on warmth. Raphael slipped cash into the vendor's pocket, and the vendor tried to refuse, and everyone smiled in that way where refusal is respect, not lack. "Will they come back?" she asked, thinking of windbreakers and envelopes and red marker circles. "Some will try," he said. "Men trained to love the sound of their own threat display do not retire gracefully. But they will find the ground under them uneven, and they will find me uninterested in theater. I've done my last performance. What do you call this, then?" she said, gesturing at the wet, the bench, the coffee. The man who used to hold cities in chokeholds, and now held a paper cup gently because it was hot and needed gentleness. "Life," he said, and it was not sentimental. It was a man choosing a noun he had long avoided. Back at the apartment, they left their shoes by the door like people who intend to stay long enough to make that a habit. He fixed the cabinet hinge that had made her curse twice a day. She rethreaded the button on his sleeve that had given up during an evening it hadn't understood. Small repairs wholly in scale. He stood behind her while she stitched and discovered that speech can be replaced by the weight of a palm on a shoulder. She looked up and discovered love without swagger can make a room bigger than any city. They did not discuss forever. They discussed groceries. They discussed how to hang a photo without ripping paint. They walked to the corner for limes just because weather asked for citrus. On the way back, heat rose from manhole covers like stage smoke, but the air carried a new clarity, as if the city had been washed through once, and the rinse water had finally run clear. That evening, they returned to the wrong door, the one that had started everything. Raphael stood where he had stood, hand on the same edge of the same threshold, except the room behind him had been rearranged. The mezcal bottle was gone. A fern sat in the window, green and insistent. The table held 2 bowls and a lemon. Jazz floated under the ceiling as if refusing to be ignored. "Wrong door," she said, smiling. "Right life?" he answered. She knocked anyway. 3 ceremonial taps. He opened it with a slowness that honored the ritual. The hallway smelled of wet air and neighbors' garlic. Somewhere, somebody sang along to a radio 3 seconds out of sync. "Do you want to come in?" he asked, because the politeness of a question is where freedom lives. "Yes," she said, because the answer to tenderness should be simple. They crossed the threshold not as fugitives, but as builders. The city outside kept doing what cities do, arguing, forgiving, charging too much for parking, inventing new ways to greet the morning. Inside, they cooked rice like it meant faith, squeezed limes like they were small suns, told stories around a table that would remember the elbows and the laughter and the silence that collected between sentences like rain in shallow bowls. Later, when the windows went black and the streetlights turned puddles into new moons, they stood together and watched weather cross the glass. He spoke into her hair the promise he could keep. "I will not be your fear." She answered with the promise she chose. "I will not be your punishment for wanting to change." Night deepened. The refrigerator hummed its unheroic song. The rain decided yes and came straight down, washing the fire from palm trunks, polishing the city to its honest, flawed shine. Somewhere east, someone swore off violence and meant it for the first time. Somewhere west, someone took a picture of a stranger in good light and remembered that seeing is how love begins. At their window, 2 silhouettes leaned together and made one shape the weather couldn't break. The door they had shared by accident now learned a new definition. Not escape, not trap. An opening with lights behind it, warm hands in front of it, and the patient, beautiful work of a life beginning where a mistake had knocked.